The equipment bay smelled like metal and oil. Most cadets never visited it after hours. There was no reason to. The Academy issued gear at the start of each cycle, and cadets were expected to keep it stored, clean, and untouched until the next training session. That was the rule. Dario Reeves did not break rules. He simply used the hours between them. He sat on a low bench near the back wall, away from the overhead lights, in the dim yellow glow of a single work lamp. His standard issue pack was open in front of him. He was taking things out, one by one, and placing them carefully on the bench in a single row that he did not rush. A short combat blade, regulation length. A coil of thin utility cord, 30 centimeters. A strip of cloth torn from an old training shirt. A ceramic shard, smooth and flat, worn on a cord around his neck like a pendant. A small fire-starting tool, no bigger than his thumb. A folded piece of reflective foil, the kind used to wrap ration packs. A piece of broken buckle, metal, sharp on one edge. The lace from his left boot. A short length of hollow tubing from a discarded cleaning brush. A flat piece of hardened resin he had found near the fabrication room. 3 small stones, rounded, heavy for their size. A cracked lens from a spare helmet visor. A folded rag soaked in machine lubricant. A blunt stylus. A bent pin. 2 strips of adhesive patch material. A twist of wire from the base of a broken locker handle. A small mirror, shard no bigger than his palm. A compressed fiber block from a torn seat cushion. A stub of marking chalk that he counted them. 24. He studied the row for a moment, the way a person studies a map before a long trip. Then he packed them back in, slowly, each one in a specific place. Not random, not careless. He knew where each one was without looking. Outside the bay, the station hummed quietly. Kareth. 9 was never fully silent. The gas giant, it orbited through off-deep magnetic pulses that made the hull plates vibrate at a frequency too low to hear, but easy enough to feel in the soles of your feet. Dario had noticed it on his first night. Most of the other cadets said they could not feel it at all. That he had been at the Galactic Combat Academy for 11 days, that he was the only human. This fact had been noted during orientation by Instructor Voren, a tall Sorok with gray-green scales, and the kind of posture that suggested he had never once considered that he might be wrong about anything. Voren had looked at Dario the way someone looks at a piece of furniture placed in the wrong room. Humans, Voren had said to the assembled cadets, are a provisional admission. Their physical profile is below average across 14 of the 17 combat metrics we use here. You are not required to adjust your training methods to accommodate them. He had said it in front of Dario. Dario had said nothing. That same day, in the first combat orientation class, Voren had asked each cadet to step forward and name their primary weapon. It was not a test with a grade. It was meant to be a statement, a declaration. The cadets went one by one. Brox, a broad-shouldered Garathi with natural bone plating across his forearms, held up both arms and said simply, "These." The class had reacted well to that. A Valeni cadet named Sor opened her jaw to reveal a secondary set of teeth coated in a fast-acting contact venom. A Vari cadet projected a low electromagnetic pulse from the nodes along his spine. An aquatic-born cadet from the Deluan species demonstrated pressure wave generation through its skin. Each presentation drew quiet respect. When Dario's turn came, he walked to the front of the room, reached into his vest, and placed a short combat blade on the desk in front of Voren. Voren looked at it. Then at Dario. "That is your primary weapon." "Yes, Instructor." "A blade." "Yes." "Nothing else." Dario met his eyes. "That's what you asked for." The room was very quiet for a moment. Voren picked up the blade, turned it once in his hand, and set it down with a faint click that somehow managed to sound like a dismissal. "Adequate," he said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Dario took the blade back and returned to his seat. After the class, Rella fell in a step beside him. She was a young thistle. Her species had 6 limbs, 4 of which she used for walking, and large compound eyes that caught light like polished glass. She was one of the few cadets who had spoken to Dario without first checking if it was allowed. "Were you embarrassed?" she asked. Her translator rendered her voice as soft and curious. Dario thought about the row of 24 items on the bench in the equipment bay. He thought about Voron's expression when he had placed the blade down. No, he said. Rella's eyes flickered. Why not? Because it was the right answer for that question. She considered this as they walked. Then she said, what would the right answer be for a different question? Dario glanced at her. For the first time in 11 days, he smiled. That, he said, depends on the question. 11 cadets stood outside the entrance to Simulation Deck 4. That the door was thick, reinforced, and painted with a yellow border that meant active hazard inside. Through the small observation window in the wall beside it, the terrain beyond looked gray and broken. Fake rock formations, low ceilings, narrow passages, and dark corners designed to feel threatening even when nothing in them was moving. Instructor Voron stood at the front with a datapad. Solo survival evaluation, he said. You enter alone. You carry standard issue gear. No personal weapons, no enhancements, no external assistance. The deck contains 3 automated patrol drones running on Class B threat protocols. Your objective is to reach the extraction point at the far end and register your arrival. Time is recorded. Any registered contact with a drone counts as a wound. 2 wounds mean failure. He looked down the line. You are being evaluated on combat effectiveness, not creativity, not cleverness. Effectiveness. He said the last word, looking at no one in particular. But Dario noticed that he said it just after his eyes passed over him. The cadets went in order of registration number. Dario was last. He waited outside and listened. He could not see anything through the observation window once the first cadet entered and the interior lighting shifted. But he could hear the results as Voron logged them. Brox finished in 4 minutes and took 1 wound. A drone had tagged him from behind a rock shelf, but he had destroyed it outright with a single impact. Sir finished in 6 minutes, clean. The very cadet disrupted all 3 drones with his pulse nodes and walked through unchallenged. 2 cadets failed. When Dario's number was called, he picked up his standard kit and walked through the door. The door sealed behind him. The deck was cold and smelled like recycled air and scorched resin from previous sessions. The ceiling was low. The rock formations were not real. They were printed composite, rough to the touch, but hollow underneath. He pressed his hand against one as he passed and felt the faint vibration of the station's magnetic pulse coming through the floor. He moved slowly. Not because he was afraid, because moving slowly meant he could hear, that he heard the first drone before he saw it. A faint rhythmic click from its rotational sensor array, coming from behind a cluster of formations to his left. He stopped. He crouched. He waited until the click pattern told him the drone was sweeping away from him, that he went right instead, that he used the second minute to study the layout rather than advance. The extraction point was at the far end, probably 140 meters in a straight line, but the formations made a straight line impossible. There were 3 possible routes. He chose the one with the lowest ceiling. Drones used optical sensors, and the low ceiling would compress their vertical scan range. He pulled the bootlace from his left boot. It took him 40 seconds to rig a basic line between 2 formation edges across a passage he was not going to use. He ran it at ankle height and tied the end loosely to a small piece of broken composite he found on the ground. Not a trap, a signal. If anything hit it, he would hear the crack. He moved on. The second drone was in an open section near the center of the deck. No cover close enough to use safely. Dario reached into his kit, found a ration foil he had folded and kept from his first day, and held it flat. He angled it toward the overhead work light until he got a reflection. He threw the foil strip low, skipping across the floor to the far left of the open section. The drone's head turned toward the movement. Dario crossed behind it. He did not run. Running made noise. He walked quickly, heel to toe, and was past the drone and into the next passage before it completed its sweep. The third drone was near the extraction point. This one was different. It was not moving. It was positioned directly in the path, stationary, which meant it was using motion detection rather than rotational sweep. Motion detection meant anything that moved in its cone of vision would trigger it. Dario stopped 5 meters away and looked at the ceiling. There was a ventilation return panel above him, 3 meters up. The panels on this deck were standard Academy issue, the same as the panels in every corridor, every bay, every room he had walked through in 11 days. They were held by 2 friction clips. No screws that he did not climb to it. Instead, he found a fire suppression sensor on the wall, a small disc, red center, on a bracket beside the last formation. He looked at his small fire starting tool that he thought for 2 seconds that he did not start a fire. That would trigger the deck's emergency protocol and invalidate his run. What he did instead was hold the tool's heating element close to the sensor face for 5 seconds. Not enough to trigger it, but enough to make it spike a reading and send a low alert pulse through the deck's environmental system. The lights shifted, just slightly. A half-second flicker as the system checked itself. The motion detection drone reset during sensor disruption events. Standard safety protocol. Dario had read the Academy's equipment maintenance manual on his 3rd night. Because he had nothing else to do, and the manual was the only document available on the shared terminal in the reset window, he walked past the drone and pressed his palm to the extraction panel. The panel chimed. Voren's voice came through the overhead speaker a moment later. Flat. Controlled. Reeves. Time recorded. Report to the debrief room. Dario laced his boot back up and walked out. In the debrief room, Brox was waiting. The big Garathi looked at him with an expression that was not quite respect and not quite suspicion. Something in the middle. You took the longest path, Brox said. I took the safest one. You didn't destroy a single drone. I wasn't asked to. Brox was quiet for a moment. You cheated. Dario sat down. The scenario said survive. It didn't say how. Brox said nothing else. But he did not look away either. The weapons declaration session was not on the training schedule. Voren announced it at the start of the morning's class without introduction or explanation. He simply told the cadets to stand in a line facing the front wall, and then he walked to the center of the room and looked at them. In joint operations between species, he said, it is standard galactic protocol to declare your combat assets to your unit before engagement. This is called a weapons declaration. It establishes shared awareness. It prevents confusion. It ensures that your unit can build a strategy around what each member actually brings. You let that land. Today you will each make a formal declaration. One primary weapon. State it clearly. State why it is your primary. Then step back. He began at the left end of the line. Brox went first. He raised his forearms and showed the natural bone plating, pale and thick, covering from elbow to wrist. Impact force, he said. Close range. Unmatched penetration. Short. Direct. Voren nodded. Sir opened her jaw and showed the venom coating on her secondary teeth. Contact toxin. Works on most organic nervous systems within 2 seconds. Voren nodded. The very cadet, his name was Fun, demonstrated the pulse nodes. Electromagnetic disruption. Disables electronics and causes neurological interference in species with implanted technology. Nod. A Deluan cadet with blue-gray skin pressed her palms flat and showed the pressure wave generation along her forearm membranes. Disorientation and structural damage at close to mid-range. Nod. Each cadet went in turn. Each had something impressive, something built into them by biology or evolution, something that could be named in 1 word or 2. Voren's nods were approving and efficient. Then he reached Dario. Reeves. Instructor. One primary weapon. What does the human bring? The room was already quiet, but it became a different kind of quiet. The kind where everyone is pretending not to pay close attention while paying very close attention. Dario said, one moment, Instructor. Voren's head tilted slightly. This is not a complicated question. No, Dario said. But the answer is... He did not wait for permission. He began. The combat blade. He touched the vest pocket where it sat. Standard reach, precise, silent. Voren opened his mouth. Dario continued. The bootlace can be used as a tripwire, a restraint, a signal line, or a tourniquet. He paused 1 second between each. The reflective foil from a ration pack. Distraction, signaling, or disruption of optical sensors. The room was very still. The ceramic shard. He touched the cord around his neck. Cutting edge in close contact. Small enough to be missed in a standard scan. He kept his voice even. The fire starting tool. Fire. Smoke. Sensor interference. Fear. Voren said. Reeves. The machine lubricant rag. Accelerant. Surface hazard. Applied to a floor or a ladder, it changes everything. He continued before Vorin could speak again. The wire length. Snare. Binding. Electrical conductor if there is a current source nearby. Some of the cadets were no longer pretending to look at the wall. The hollow tubing. Directed airflow. Delivery system for powdered materials. Breathing aid in low atmosphere sections. He did not pause now. He had been through this list before, alone in the equipment bay, many times until it came out clean and in order. The flat resin piece. Pressure pad trigger for a simple mechanical trap. The 3 stones. Throne. Distraction. Weight in a makeshift sling. Percussion to create sound from a distance. Rella's compound eyes had shifted fully toward him. The cracked visor lens. Focused light in the right conditions. Sharp edge. Used against an optical sensor, it creates false reflection data. He kept going. The compressed fiber block. Wedge. Fused material. Stuffed into a ventilation return. It changes airflow patterns in a section of the deck. The marking chalk. Ground-level signals between allies. Mixed with water and applied to a surface, it shows footprints. He was almost through. The bent pin. Lock mechanism manipulation in standard academy doors. I checked. They use an older, very pin tumbler design. The adhesive patches. Binding. Sealing a pressure joint. Keeping a wound closed. He took a breath. The mirror shard. Signaling. Blind corner vision. And at the right angle in the right light. Temporary blindness in a species with photosensitive eyes. He stopped. The room was completely silent, but he said, "That is 23. The 24th is not an object." Vorin's voice was careful. "What is the 24th?" Dario looked at him. "The assumption that I only have one." No one moved. After a long moment, Vorin reached down and made a mark on his datapad. His jaw was tight. His stylus moved precisely the way it always did. But he pressed it down slightly harder than usual. "Noted," he said. "Step back." Dario stepped back. Rella was standing 2 places down the line. She did not look at Dario, but the 4 lower sections of her thorax shifted in a rapid pattern. The thistle equivalent of a laugh being held back. Brox was staring at the wall. His expression had not changed, but the bone plating along his forearms had shifted. The slight rise that Dario had come to recognize as the Garathi response to something they did not expect and could not immediately categorize. Vorin moved on to the next cadet without another word. But the class that morning ended 10 minutes early. Fleet Marshal Cinda arrived without warning. The Academy's Common Alert System gave a single chime at midday. Not an alarm, just a notification. And then Director Omu's voice came through the overhead speakers in every corridor and room across Kareth 9. All senior cadets report to Assembly Bay 1. Bring full kit. That was all. Cinna was already in the bay when they arrived. She was not tall, not physically impressive by galactic standards. She was a Cathani, a species with long, narrow faces and deep-set gray eyes, and she wore a Fleet Marshal's rank band across her left shoulder, dark red against black. She did not introduce herself. She stood with her hands behind her back and watched the cadets enter the way a person watches a door they have been waiting behind for a long time. Director Omu stood beside her. Omu was old, even by her species standards. She had pale brown skin, a pattern of faded markings across her forehead that indicated rank and age, and the specific quality of stillness that came from having watched many people underestimate many things. Vorin stood to one side. Section 7 of this station, Omu said, is under lockdown. A security breach scenario is active. Planet hostile unit, 3 automated combat drones, Class C threat rating. Real drones. Real consequences if you make contact. Your objective is to locate and neutralize the threat and clear the section. A pause. This is not a simulation. The cadets absorb that. Teams have been assigned. Omu read from her datapad. She listed 4 teams of 3. Dario was placed with Rella and Brox. Brox looked at Dario. Dario looked at the floor plan of Section 7 on the wall display, which had been left visible. Intentionally, he suspected. He studied it for 30 seconds. "Let's go," Brox said. 2 minutes, Dario said that Brox's plating shifted. "We are being timed 2 minutes saves 10. Dario turned to the display. Section 7 has 4 main corridors. The drones are Class C, which means optical and heat sensor arrays, standard sweep patterns. The lighting in Section 7 is maintenance level, low, amber. That reduces optical range. He traced the corridors with his finger. This passage here is 40 centimeters narrower than standard. A Class C drone cannot turn in it. If we move the engagement there, we take their mobility away. Brox was quiet. Rella said, "What about heat sensors?" Dario reached into his kit and pulled out the lubricant rag. It's not enough to mask a full signature. But if we move along the outer wall in Section 7, the hull temperature from the gas giant's heat radiation is higher than body temperature for most of the path. It blurs the reading. He looked at them both. Brox breaks the drones when we get close enough. Rella, your compound eyes work better in low amber light than ours. You watch angles we can't. I find the paths and the timing. He paused. Any changes? Brox said nothing for a moment. Then, no changes. They moved. Section 7 was cold, low-lit, and smelled like recycled air and unused machinery. The amber lights cast everything in a flat yellow that made distances hard to judge. Dario kept one hand on the outer wall as they moved, feeling the warmth coming through the hull plating. The first drone was in the second corridor. Rella spotted it from behind a corner. She put 2 of her upper limbs out flat, the thistle signal for stop. They stopped. She used her fingers to show the drone's position and sweep angle. Dario pointed to the narrow passage to the left. They went left. The drones sweep past behind them. The second drone was stationed at a junction. Open space. No cover on the path to the narrow passage. The drone was still, which meant it was in passive mode, waiting for motion. Dario pulled the mirror shard from his pack. He held it around the corner at floor level and angled it until he could see the drone's position in the reflection. Then he checked the ceiling. There was a pipe junction above the drone, old station infrastructure, the kind that knocked and settled when pressure changed in the system. That he took one of the 3 stones from his pocket and looked at Brox. He pointed up at the pipe junction, then made a throwing motion with his hand. Brox looked at the pipe. He looked at the stone. Then he held out his hand. Dario put the stone in it. Brox threw it with precision, a short, controlled snap of the wrist, nothing loud, just enough. The stone struck the pipe junction and rattled down into the gap between the pipe and the wall. The pipe gave a loud metal knock. The drone's head snapped toward the sound. They crossed behind it in 4 seconds. The third drone was between them and the hostile unit, a deactivated training bot that had been given a new threat code for the exercise. The drone was active, moving, and it had Rella pinned behind a support column before any of them saw it come around a corner. Dario moved. He grabbed the reflective foil from his kit. 20 meters to his left, the section's emergency lighting panel sat on the wall. Amber backing, bright core. He held the foil flat and angled it toward the panel. The reflection hit the drone's optical sensor array directly 0.1 second. That he grabbed the bent pin from his kit, moved to the maintenance panel on the wall behind the drone's position, and forced the fire suppression test port open. It took 4 seconds and left a mark on his fingers. He held the fire starting tools element near the internal sensor. The suppression system gave its check pulse. The drone reset. Brox was already moving. In the reset window, he crossed the distance in 2 steps, grabbed the drone by its upper housing with both plated forearms, and compressed. The drone's casing cracked. Its lights went out. Rella stepped out from behind the column. The 3 of them reached the hostile unit, the training bot, 30 seconds later. Brox disabled it with 1 strike. The section-wide alert chimed once. Clear. Dario leaned against the wall. His hands were steady. He put the foil and the pin back in their places in his pack. Rella looked at him. The mirror, the fire sensor, and the stone. She counted on her limbs. 3 things at once. Not once, Dario said. In order. They walked back toward Assembly Bay 1. Brox walked ahead of them and said nothing, but he did not walk fast. The 4 teams returned to Assembly Bay 1 at different times. Dario's team was third. 2 of the other teams had taken wounds. 1 had nearly failed. A drone had cornered 3 cadets in an open corridor, and only Soar's venom had stopped it from registering a second contact. They had cleared their section, but it had not been cleaned. Dario's team had taken 0 wounds. Vorin logged the result without looking up from his datapad. Cinda stood at the far end of the bay with her hands still behind her back. She had not moved since they left. Director Omu sat in the single chair near the wall, quiet, watching. When all teams were back, Vorin called the debrief to order. He went through the results methodically. Team 1, 2 wounds, full clear, time within parameters. Team 2, 1 wound, full clear, good use of biological assets. Team 4, 2 wounds, partial clear, needed work on coordination. That he came to Team 3. 0 wounds, full clear, fastest overall time. He said it the way someone reports weather. Flat, even. He set the datapad down and looked at Dario. Your methods in that section were irregular. They worked, Dario said. That is not the point. This academy trains cadets in established doctrine. What you did in Section 7 was outside any approved combat framework. You used maintenance infrastructure. You manipulated station systems. You used non-weapon materials as tools. With respect, Dario said, the mission parameters said neutralize the threat and clear the section. They did not list approved methods. Vorin's jaw tightened. The intent, Instructor. Omi's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the kind of voice that had been listened to for a very long time and knew it. Vorin stopped. Omu stood. She walked slowly to the center of the bay. She was shorter than most of the cadets and older than anyone else in the room by a wide margin, and the attention moved to her the way it does with people who have never once needed to raise their voice to hold a room. The mission parameters, she said, specified neutralization. The team neutralized. The method is not the mission. She looked at Vorin with something that was not unkindness, but was also not softness. Log it as a full clear. Vorin picked up the datapad and logged it. Cinda moved for the first time. She walked from the far end of the bay toward the center, and the cadets shifted without meaning to, not out of fear, but out of the same instinct that makes people step back from something they recognize as significant. She stopped in front of Dario. Cadet Reeves. Marshal. She studied him for a moment with her gray eyes. What is your doctrine? The bay was quiet. Dario did not look at Vorin. He thought about the row of 24 items on the bench. He thought about the pipe joint and the mirror and the fire suppression sensor. He thought about Rella pinned behind a column. The goal is to be alive at the end, Marshal, he said. Everything else is a tool. Cinda was quiet for 3 seconds. She did not smile. She reached into the breast pocket of her uniform, pulled out a small data chip, and held it between 2 fingers. She looked at it briefly, then put it back. She made a note on her own datapad instead. Then she said, "Thank you," turned, and walked back to her position. Vorin looked at the class. His expression had settled into something tight and carefully controlled. He opened his mouth to resume the debrief. Brock spoke first. Instructor. His voice was flat in the way that Garathi voices were always flat. No decoration, no warmth, just the sentence. I want to know for the record that Cadet Reeves's approach saved Rella's life in Section 7. The drone had her position and a clear contact angle. His actions broke the drone's reset before it could register the wound. A pause. I would not have thought of it. The room was very still. Vorin looked at Brox. Brox looked back at him without expression. There was no counter available. Vor knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. He made a note on his datapad. Dario could not see what it said, and then he straightened. Debrief concluded, he said. Dismissed. The cadets began to move. Rella appeared beside Dario and pressed 2 of her upper limbs briefly against his arm, her species equivalent of a hand on the shoulder. You knew, she said, when you were standing in that section, looking at the pipe and the panel. You already knew what you were going to do. Dario picked up his kit. I knew what was available. That's different. Rella considered this. Is it? He thought about the equipment bay, about laying out 24 items on a bench in the dark, alone, on the 11th night after arriving somewhere new, because the only way to be ready was to know exactly what you were carrying before you needed to use it. It takes longer, he said, knowing what's available. But when the moment comes, he shouldered his pack. You don't have to think. The equipment bay was empty except for two of them. Rella had followed Dario there after the evening meal, which she ate very little of because her species processed nutrients differently and the Academy's food dispenser still had not been adjusted correctly for thistle biology. She had told Dario this once, early in the cycle, and he had spent 20 minutes looking at the dispenser settings and found a combination that worked better. She had not mentioned it since, but she had started sitting near him at meals. Dario set the pack down on the bench under the single work lamp. He opened it. He began to take things out, one by one, in their order, and placed them in a row. Rella sat across from him and watched. She did not say anything while he laid them out. She had learned quickly that Dario did not like to be interrupted in the middle of something that required attention. She had also learned that if she waited, he would talk. Not a lot, but enough. When all 24 were on the bench, she looked at the row. "Tell me again," she said, that he started at the left. The combat blade, the cord, the cloth strip, the ceramic shard. He walked through each one, and this time he did not just name them. He connected them to the last week's. The visor lens he had used to make the drone read a false reflection. The bootlace he had used as a signal line in the simulation. The 3 stones, one of which Brox had thrown with a short snap of his wrist that had been, Dario thought, nearly perfect. Rella listened. Her compound eyes caught the light from the work lamp and broke it into small pieces. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Did you know," she said, "when you listed them in the declaration session, did you know then that you would use all of them?" Dario looked at the row. "No." "Then how did you know to carry them?" He turned the ceramic shard over in his hand. It was smooth on one side, rough on the other. He had found it in an equipment disposal bin on his first day. He had kept it because it was sharp, flat, and small enough to carry without noticing. "I didn't know I would use them," he said. "I knew I might have to." Rella processed this. "That is different." "Yes. Most soldiers carry what they plan to use. Most soldiers know what fight they're walking into." He set the shard down. "I never know that. Nobody does, really. They just tell themselves they do because it's easier to carry less." Rella's lower limbs shifted, a slow, thinking movement. "Humans are not the strongest species in this academy. No. Or the fastest. Or the most physically resilient. No. But you came in last on the practical and finished first." Her eyes moved across the row of items. "And in Section 7, a drone had me cornered and you were out of direct options, and you used 3 things at the same time that nobody would have called weapons." Dario began putting things back into the pack. Slowly, each one in its place. "The galaxy has very specific ideas," he said, "about what a weapon is. And humans do not. Humans have a different question." He placed the foil back, then the wire, then the 3 stones. "Most species ask, 'What is my weapon?' We ask, 'What is available?'" Rella watched his hands. "Is that why Cinda made a note?" Dario did not answer immediately. He placed the mirror shard in its pocket, the bent pin beside it. He folded the rag and put it back. The pack was nearly full again. "I don't know what Cinda thinks," he said. "I know what she asked. She asked what my doctrine is." He closed the pack and set it flat. "I gave her the honest answer. The goal is to be alive at the end." "Yes." "And everything else is a tool." "Yes." A sound at the bay entrance made them both look up. Director Omu stood in the doorway. She was alone. She was wearing a plain gray coat over her uniform, which meant she had come from somewhere informal or was going somewhere she did not want to be recognized heading toward. She looked at the two of them with a particular expression she had worn in Assembly Bay 1. Not surprise, not concern, just the steady look of someone confirming something they already suspected. "Cadet Reeves," she said. Dario stood. "Fleet Marshal Cinda has submitted a formal request to the Academy Board." Omu stepped just inside the entrance. "She is requesting the development of a human combat doctrine manual for official galactic military distribution. She wants it documented, structured, and made available to Joint Command units across 5 fleet systems." The work lamp hummed. "She has requested that you write it." Rella's thorax made the rapid shift movement that meant she was holding back something large. Dario looked at the pack on the bench. He picked it up. He put it over one shoulder, the way he always did, left side, balanced forward. He thought about the bench and the row of 24 items. He thought about how long the list had taken to build and how many times it had grown since the first night he made it. How many things he had found since then that he had not yet cataloged. "Tell her, I'll need a bigger list," he said. Omiya looked at him for a moment. She had lived a very long time. She had trained cadets from 41 species across 6 decades of service. She had watched many young soldiers come through this academy believing they understood what made a warrior. She had not, in all that time, met a human. She stepped back from the doorway. Dario walked out. Rella fell into step beside him, her limbs steady on the floor, 2 upper ones folded back in the relaxed position she used when she was comfortable. Their footsteps moved down the corridor and turned the corner and were gone. Omiya stood in the bay entrance alone. The work lamp hummed over the empty bench. She looked at the space where the 24 items had been. Then she smiled, small, quiet, and satisfied, and walked back the way she had come.